So as you know, we're reading the Republic. We're going to be doing this for the next 7 class periods, I think, or something like that. Yeah, we're going to be reading this for a little while. But I think there's a lot of interesting stuff in here. And my goal is not just to read through it with y'all because we want to have fun and read a book or something. I want y'all to be thinking about what these characters are saying here, all right? And what Plato is trying to get at with this dialogue. Because he has a bunch of different aims, like we looked at last class. There are a bunch of different themes and symbols. So as we read through it together, I'm going to ask y'all questions. We're going to talk about it. And we're just going to get as far as we can get today in book 1. We're not going to finish it. We might not finish book 2 until our 3rd, perhaps 4th class. That seems to be how it's going in my other class as well. So does anybody remember where we left off? If you could pull up the text in front of you. I think we left off at like 332 C5. Does that sound right? I think that's right? Because Socrates and the gang just got to Cephalus's house, right? They were arrested by... No? Am I in the wrong place? We had just started the first page?
Yeah, something of that sort. I have like annotations on it and stuff.
Okay, so how far do yours go?
Just that first page.
Just the first page, okay. So we talked about what going down and going up means, right? And what those movements are associated with, what symbols. I thought I remember talking about Glaucon speaking for Socrates, right? Okay, so I'll pick it up then at 327 C5. Does that sound good? And we'll just start from there. So I'm just going to read for a little bit, but then I'll ask for a volunteer to read for Cephalus when we get there. Okay? All right, so 327 C5. I'll start with Polemarchus. All right, so Polemarchus says to Socrates, after they've been stopped on the road, right? Socrates and Glaucon want to go back up. They want to go back up to their home, do philosophy, think about things. We talked about what this movement is associated with. And Polemarchus, who's supposed to represent our democratic form of governance, right, says, it looks to me, Socrates, as if you two are hurrying to get away to town. That isn't a bad guess. But do you see how many we are? Certainly. Well, then either you must prove yourselves stronger than all these people, or you will have to stay here. Something very interesting is happening right here. What major themes and symbols are being evoked by what Polemarchus is saying here? What's he basically saying to Socrates? Socrates and Glaucon want to leave. What does Polemarchus say?
You must stay because that's what the majority of people are telling you to do.
Right, and they're kind of threatening him with use of force, right? They say, well, either you must prove yourselves stronger than all these people, or you're going to have to do what we want you to do, right? So this evokes one of the major themes of the Republic, which is force versus persuasion. And you might also say power versus knowledge, okay? Because Socrates and Glaucon want to go back up. They want to do their philosophy, learn new things, discover new bits of knowledge. They're not being persuaded to stay by Polemarchus and his gang, right? They're being stopped. They're being forced to stay, right? And so I think this is indicative of that theme, as well as I think Plato's also giving a social commentary here. What happens in democratic society? What's happening in Athens right now? Well, the majority are making decisions for the smart people. Okay? In a democracy, the majority votes and decides social policy. Plato's not going to think this is really cool. Okay? He's going to say the smart people, the philosophers, the knowledgeable and wise people should be in charge. But that's not what happens in a democracy, is it? So, we see that wise men like Socrates do not have control in this kind of society. The majority, or the masses, have control. All right, let's continue on. Socrates says, "Isn't there another alternative still? That we persuade you that you should let us go." There you go. This is the philosopher's plea, right? When you're having a discussion with a reasonable person, they're not going to try to force you into their worldview or force you to think or act in a certain way. They're going to try to persuade you, right? By appealing to your logic and reasoning capacities. What appeal is this from rhetoric? You're trying to persuade someone of something. What appeal are you utilizing? Not ethos, not pathos, but what? Logos, that's right. Yeah. Again, Socrates, being the good philosopher he is, the rational, reasonable guy, is like, well, couldn't I persuade you using logic? And Polemarchus says, but could you persuade us if we don't listen? Isn't this telling? Have you ever had a conversation with a group of people that had a different worldview than you? How did that go for you? Did you persuade them of anything? People behave differently when they're in a group of people, right? When there's a mob or there's a mass in front of you, right? Individual thinking, individual critical thinking seems to go out the window in these kinds of scenarios. And, thank you. Yeah. And what ends up happening is you can't really persuade this group of people if they believe something differently than you or if they want something differently from you in a lot of cases. But there's another thing also happening with Polemarchus' response here. Does anybody know what Socrates' fate was? This book was written after Socrates died.
He was executed.
Do you know anything more about it? Can you say anything more about it?
Yeah, poison.
Right, hemlock. Yeah, what were you going to say?
I was going to say he got poisoned by hemlock.
Right. Does anybody know why? Why was Socrates executed?
Wasn't it something like convincing the young people to not revere or look up to the older generation as much?
That's what he was accused of. He was brought forth in front of the politicians, and they said, hey, you're stirring up trouble in Athens, Socrates. You're confusing the young people. Okay? You're getting the young people to question the old ways and the old traditions. We can't have you around, okay, because you're causing trouble. And what we see in the Apology, which is another one of Plato's dialogues, in which he gives a literary reenactment of this trial, of Socrates' trial, is the politicians don't listen to Socrates' defense. Okay? They don't listen to what he has to say. They don't try to think about it. They don't reflect on it. They've made up their decision before he enters the room, okay, that they're going to execute him. And so I think what this line is doing is it's a nod to the fate of Socrates. Just like the politicians in his day didn't listen to him and accused him of stirring up trouble, even though he didn't think he was doing that. He thought he was bettering people by helping them learn things and question the old ways. He was still executed. Right? His pleas fell on deaf ears during his trial, just as Polemarchus is implying that whatever Socrates is going to say is also going to fall on deaf ears. Okay? He and his gang are not going to listen. They want Socrates and Glaucon to come with them, and they're not going to have it any other way. Okay? And you might also ask yourself, the kind of behavior that Polemarchus is exhibiting, isn't this kind of how democracies work in practice? In a democracy, do people rationally and critically think about the issues and choose the best candidate? Or are they generally just on Team Blue or Team Red and vote Team Blue or Team Red no matter what? How does it seem to you?
But wouldn't that be more of a republic and less of a democracy? Because like if you were like a direct democracy, everybody would kind of just vote. Like,
Yeah, so we do have like a democratic republic in the US. Yeah. But in this case, the kind of government that Socrates is going to be advocating for later is not even a democratic republic. It's just a republic where the smart people are in charge. The philosophers are in charge. And they make the decisions amongst themselves and decide what to do. They don't worry about really what the people think or believe. They're trying to do what's good for the people, ideally, but yeah. And Glaucon responds, well, there's no way we could, right? We couldn't persuade you if you're not going to listen. Well, we won't listen. You better make up your mind to that. Adeimantus chimes in. You mean to say you don't know that there is to be a torch race on horseback for the goddess tonight? On horseback? That is something new. Are they going to race on horseback and hand the torches on in relays? Or what? Why is Socrates now chiming in and asking a question here? Can anybody guess? Adeimantus says, hey, you know this thing is happening later on, right? And what does Socrates do? He jumps at the bit to ask a question about it. Why? What is Socrates fundamentally motivated by? Because he's a philosopher?
Discussion.
Discussion, and what comes from discussion, though?
Like answers.
Knowledge, right? Yeah, so he's confronted with this scenario that's going to happen later, and he's trying to learn more about it, right? Here, we see Socrates' love of knowledge coming forth, impelling him to ask a question about this event that's going to happen later that night. Polemarchus then responds in relays. And besides, there will be an all-night celebration that will be worth seeing. We will get up after dinner and go to see the festivities. We will meet lots of young men there and have a discussion. So stay and do as we ask. And what happens? Who responds to Polemarchus? Is it Socrates? No, who is it? It's Glaucon, right? Glaucon says, it looks as if we will have to stay. Socrates says, if you think so, we must. We've seen this before. What's the significance of Glaucon speaking for Socrates here? What is this supposed to symbolize?
It represents like the democracy.
Right. The current state of things in Athens is such that, look, the people who should be in charge, the smart people, they're not the ones in charge. They're not making the decisions. They don't get to make the decisions. Okay, they get spoken for by others. And that's exactly what's happening here. So Socrates is not making the decision to go. Glaucon's making the decision for him. And in democracies, Plato thinks, the unwise people make the decisions for the wise. Because there's a lot more unwise people than there are wise people, right? And so the majority will be taken up of unwise people. People who don't really know how reality works. Okay. So we went to Polemarchus' house, and there we found Lysias and Euthydemus, the brothers of Polemarchus. And what is more, Thrasymachus of Chalcedon was there too. And Carmentides of Cynea and Cleitophon, the son of Aristodemus. Polemarchus' father, Cephalus, was also inside, and I thought he looked quite old. You see, I hadn't seen him for some time. He was sitting on a sort of chair with cushions and had a wreath on his head, as he had been offering a sacrifice in the courtyard. Cephalus here is a symbol. He's a character in the dialogue, but he's also a symbol. He's an old man, so what do you think he's a symbol of?
Wisdom, tradition.
Tradition. Yeah. He is a symbol of the old ways, of the old values, of the old norms that Athens is kind of based on right now. But remember, what Plato is doing in this book is he's trying to do something revolutionary, right? He's trying to, in a sense, overturn the old norms and traditions, establish a new way of life for the Athenian people based on knowledge and rational analysis. And so Cephalus here represents the old norms and traditions. And we see that in how he is described, right? He's an old man. He's sitting on a chair with cushions. Perhaps we might say this is symbolic of the fact that in Athens right now, the old norms and traditions are privileged. They're on a pedestal, right? And he had a wreath on his head as he had been offering a sacrifice in the courtyard. Now this is important. Part of the old ways and the old traditions are the rituals and sacrifices to the gods. Okay? And Cephalus is engaged in that as well. So here we see the old norms and traditions being associated with a particular kind of religious life that is occurring in Athens. Okay? We sat down beside him, since some chairs were arranged in a circle there. As soon as he saw me, Cephalus greeted me. Socrates, you don't often come down to the Piraeus. Here we see this coming down movement. You don't often come down to the Piraeus to see us. This makes sense, of course, right? Because what are philosophers like? Well, they don't often go down to the docks and talk to the workers. They don't go into the factories and talk to people. They got their head in the clouds thinking about things, right? Their mind is up. All right? We don't often see you come down to the Piraeus. Okay. Yet you should. If it were still easy for me to make the trip to town, you wouldn't have to come here. On the contrary, we would come to you. But as it is, you ought to come here more often. I want you to know, you see, that in my case at least, as the other pleasures, the bodily ones, wither away, my appetites for discussions and their pleasures grow stronger. So please, do as I ask, have your conversation with these young men and stay here with us, as you would with your close friends and relatives. Okay. Who would like to be Cephalus moving forward? I'll stop you when I need to stop you, but I'll be Socrates. Who would like to be Cephalus? No takers? Where are all the theater kids at? Come on, this is your time. This is your chance. Okay. All right, so I'll start because I'm Socrates, all right? So he says, please stay here, chat with us. I certainly will, Cephalus. In fact, I enjoy engaging in discussion with the very old. I think we should learn from them, since they are like people who have traveled a road that we too will probably have to follow. What the road is like, whether rough and difficult or smooth and easy. Okay, so I want to stop there for a second. Socrates says he enjoys engaging in discussions with the very old. What can we say this is symbolic of? Socrates is saying, I like talking to old people. But remember, what is Cephalus supposed to represent here? Not democracy. Tradition, the old ways and norms. Here we see Plato saying through Socrates, look, I like engaging, investigating, exploring, questioning the old norms and traditions. Okay, there's value to be found in that. The implication is that we can learn from the old norms and traditions. While they're not sufficient for the new way of life that we want to establish and live ourselves, there's wisdom and knowledge to be gained from the old norms and traditions. Right? And so tradition is not useless. It's not entirely bad or empty. Even if we can improve upon the old tradition, the old norms, the old worldviews, they're still useful to us. Okay, there's knowledge and wisdom there that we have not mined yet. Truly, you might say, we stand on the shoulders of giants. Our existence today is intimately dependent on everything that has happened before and the ways of life that have preceded us. Okay? So even though those ways of life aren't perfect, and those ways of thinking aren't perfect for today, there's still value there. And we should explore it. And I would be particularly glad to find, Socrates says, out from you what you think about it, since you have reached the point in life the poets call old age's threshold, death. Is it a difficult time of life? What have you to report about it?
By Zeus, Socrates, I will tell you exactly what I think. You see, a number of us who are more or less the same age often get together so as to preserve the whole saying. When they meet, the majority of our members will lament, longing for the lost pleasures of their youth, and reminiscing about sex, drinking parties, feasts, and the other things that go along with them. They get irritated, as if they have been deprived of important things, and have lived well then, but are not living now. Some others, too, even moan about the abuse heaped on old people by their relatives, and for that reason recite a litany of all the evils old age has caused them.
Okay, stop there for a second. So, Cephalus is saying, when I get together with my old friends, a lot of my old friends don't like growing old. Why not? What's bad about growing old?
They miss all the stuff they did when they were young.
Like what?
Partying, sex, having feasts, hanging out together.
Right! They miss engaging in the sensual bodily pleasures. Right? You probably know this. When men get old, they have dysfunction down there. Right? And so they probably can't engage in a lot of the same activities that they used to when they're young. The people Cephalus has been speaking to, they don't like growing old because now they can't have all the sex and drink all of the wine and have all the feasts that they did when they were young. Right? Hangovers are worse for them now. Wine could kill them perhaps if they drank too much of it or ate too much because they're old and frail. And they can't have sex. Okay? So these people don't like growing old because they cannot please themselves like they could when they were young. They can't have as much fun. And then he also talks about how some people claim they're victims of elder abuse. Right? He says, some others even moan about the abuse heaped on old people by their relatives. And for that reason recite a litany of all the evils old age has caused them. Okay, continue on.
But I don't think they blame the real cause, Socrates. After all, if that were the cause, I too would have had the same experiences, at least as far as old age is concerned, and so would everyone else of my age. But as it is, I have met others in the past who don't feel that way, in particular the poet Sophocles. I was once present when he was asked by someone, "How are you as far as sex goes, Sophocles? Can you still make love to a woman?" "Quite, man," he replied. "I'm very glad to have escaped from all that, like a slave who has escaped from a deranged and savage master." I thought at the time what he said was sensible, and I still do. You see, old age brings peace and freedom from all such things. When the appetite ceases to stress and importune us, everything Sophocles said comes to pass, and we escape from many insane masters. But in these matters, and in those concerning one's relatives, the real cause isn't old age, Socrates, but the way people live. If they are orderly and contented, old age too is only moderately onerous. If they aren't, both old age, Socrates, and youth are hard to bear.
Okay, good. So, what does Cephalus actually say he thinks about old age? Does he like it, or does he dislike it?
Well, I think that he's saying that if you lead your life in the right way leading up to old age, that you'll be better off. I don't think he's saying that it's like sunshine and rainbows, but I don't think he's saying it's bad.
I think you're totally right. Yeah. So there are a number of things that he said here that are important. Okay? First of all, he brings in this example about Sophocles. Okay? And when somebody asks him, hey, Sophocles, are you impotent? Can you still make love to a woman? What does he say? Quiet, man. I am very glad to have escaped from all that, like a slave who has escaped from a deranged and savage master. Who's the deranged and savage master Sophocles is talking about?
Is it women?
Not women.
Is it like the urges?
Yeah, it's desire. It's desire, okay?
But can't you just say women?
Think about it. You are pulled this way and that by your desires.
Yes, but women.
Okay? You want food, so you eat food. What's going to happen later? You're going to have a desire for food again, and you're going to have to eat food again. One day you're horny, so you want to have sex. And then what's going to happen a month later? Or perhaps a day later, depending on who you are. You're going to get horny again, right?
Yeah.
So you have these desires. You have these desires that are pulling on you, trying to get you to satisfy them. And they never go away. Okay? Even if you satisfy them in the moment, they're going to come back and they're going to weigh on you again.
He sees a woman and just explodes.
Not anymore.
He's better than that. Quiet man.
And so, what Sophocles is getting at, and what Cephalus is getting at, is that old age is actually liberatory. Because when you're old, you escape from the servitude of those desires that you had when you were young. Okay? You're no longer a slave to your desires when you get old, because the desires kind of fade. You don't have the same desire for sex that you did. You don't have the same desire for drunkenness that you did when you were younger. Your desires and your priorities change, and that's a good thing. Okay? Cephalus is saying that's a good thing. Old age allows one to escape the servitude of desire. He says, old age brings peace and freedom from all such things. When the appetites cease to stress and importune us, everything Sophocles said comes to pass. And we escape from many insane masters. But what's the crux of this? When you get old, are you going to be completely free from desire?
No.
You're not going to be completely free from desire. But what's going to influence how well you handle old age is what? The way that you've been living your life. What kind of habits have you established throughout your life? What have you been engaging in? What have your priorities been? You know, have you been prioritizing the transient things that come and go that weigh on you, like sex and drunkenness? Or have you been prioritizing other things, like building strong relationships with your family and friends, seeking after a noble goal, right? The real cause isn't old age, he says, but the way people live. If they are orderly and contented, old age too is only moderately onerous. If they aren't orderly and contented, both old age, Socrates, and youth are hard to bear. So remember what we said last class. One of the major themes of the Republic is going to be how the individual and society are reflections of one another. And if you want to have an orderly and noble and good society, you need to have orderly, good, and noble individuals. And if you want to live a good, happy, fulfilled life, you need to order your life in a particular way. You need to prioritize different things in your life in a certain way. Right? And one of the implications here is that the way that you ought to order your life is such that reason and knowledge are the master of your desires and your instincts and your urges. Okay? Because as long as you have reason and logic as the master over your other psychological processes, your other instinctual urges, you'll be able to navigate life in a good, fulfilling way. And you won't just be a slave to desire, always giving in to desire, always giving into your urges. And you know this already, right? If you don't set a particular time for yourself a limit on how often you look at your phone, what are you going to do? You're just going to keep going back to your phone every day, and soon you'll be spending 9 hours on your phone every day. But you know, logically, hey, being addicted to Facebook isn't a good thing for me, so I need to limit my time on Facebook, right? Or I need to limit my time on Netflix. Or I need to limit how much alcohol I consume so I don't black out. Or limit the drugs that I'm doing so I don't become addicted, right? So here, we see another image of what the properly ordered, good, happy life looks like. And a lot of that has to do with our habits and the kinds of activities that we engaged in previously is going to determine how we act later. Okay. I admired him for saying that, and I wanted him to tell me more, so I urged him on. This is important too. Socrates wants something. So what does that mean? Or what is Plato implying? Desire itself is not bad. We cannot completely eliminate desire. What is more important than eliminating desire is making sure that the objects of your desires are the appropriate objects. So Socrates here isn't saying he wants sex, he wants drugs, he wants wine. I wanted him to tell me more. The object of his desire is knowledge. He is channeling his eros, his desire for things, into knowledge and wisdom. And that's good. And that's how we ought to live our lives, Plato is implying. So, desire is not inherently bad, but we need to be careful about what we desire and where we channel our desirous energies into, what activities we channel them into. Okay? I imagine when you say that, Cephalus, the masses do not accept it. Literally, masses here is translated in the Greek as hoi polloi. Have y'all heard that before? The hoi polloi. I think it was said in SpongeBob one time. On the contrary, they think you bear old age more easily, not because of the way you live, but because you are wealthy. For the wealthy, they say, have many consolations. So what are the people saying about Cephalus? Why is old age easy for him?
He's rich.
He's got money, right? And isn't life easier when you have money? Maybe more money, more problems, I don't know. But it certainly helps, right? Wealth gives you a certain amount of privilege.
Are they saying he can basically pay for his desires? Like if he desires party, he can still technically pay for it, or if he desires sex, he can pay for it.
There's kind of the idea like that. It's basically that, look, if you're old and don't have any money, life is going to suck for you. But the reason why Cephalus is doing well is because he does have money and life isn't hard for him. And that's why he can bear old age well. That's what the people say about him. Right? But what is Cephalus going to say?
That's true, they are not convinced. And there is something in their objection, though not as much as they think. Themistocles?
Yeah, I think the Themistocles is...
Themistocles, alright, that's not good. Themistocles' retort is relevant here. When someone from Serapis insulted him by saying his high reputation was due to the city, not to himself, he replied that had he been a Seraphian, he would not be famous, but nor would the other, had he been an Athenian. The same account applies to those who are not rich and find old age hard to bear. A good person would not easily bear old age if it were coupled with poverty, but one who wasn't good would not be at peace with himself, even if he were wealthy.
Right. So Cephalus reasserts his position. Right? He says, okay, yeah, wealth does help. It's good to be wealthy. It helps you bear old age better. But even more important than wealth is ordering your life properly and being good. Because if you're not good, your life ain't going to be good when you're old. Okay? Your life isn't going to be organized properly. You can have all the wealth in the world, and if your life isn't organized properly, you're still going to have a shitty life. Right? Think about all the people who have won the lottery, and their lives have been ruined as a result of it. They had more money than anybody could ever need or want. But because they didn't organize their priorities and their character in a certain way, their life still turns out bad. Right? So, what we see here is that, again, Cephalus is saying, being good, ordering your life in a particular way is more important than wealth. My happiness is not due primarily to my wealth. Did you inherit most of your wealth, Cephalus, or did you make it yourself?
What did I make for myself, Socrates, you ask? As a moneymaker, I am in between my grandfather and my father. You see, my grandfather and namesake inherited about the same amount of wealth as I possess and multiplied it many times. However, my father, Licinius, diminished the amount to even less than I have now. As for me, I am satisfied to leave my sons here no less, but a little more than I inherited.
Okay. So, then Socrates asks him, hey, are you a trust fund baby or are you a self-made man, Cephalus? And what does he say? His grandfather had money that he left to his father, but what did his father do?
Didn't he like spend it all, like diminish it? Like
He diminished the wealth. Right. Yeah. So he says, as a moneymaker, I am between my grandfather and my father. So he's here. Okay? He did better with money than his father, perhaps not as good as his grandfather. But what he's trying to imply here is he's like, look, I didn't get my money from nowhere. My father pissed a lot of it away. In a lot of ways, I am a self-made man. So I understand the life that it takes to make money, to do well in business. I have worked hard for this. I didn't just inherit it, okay? Because my father did not leave me with much at all. And he's happy and satisfied, he says, to leave my sons here no less but a little more than I inherited. And he's being, I think, a little humble here, because he probably has a lot more money he's leaving his sons than his father left him. The reason I ask is that you do not seem particularly to love money. And those who have not made it themselves are usually like that. But those who have made it themselves love it twice as much as anyone else. For just as poets love their poems and fathers their children, so those who have made money take their money seriously, both as something they have made themselves and, just as other people do, because it is useful. This makes them difficult even to be with, since they are unwilling to praise anything except money. Okay, I'd like to stop there for one thing. What's this business about bringing poets and fathers into it? Plato's not just giving a commentary on what it's like to have money. What else do you think he's saying here?
Well, I think that the Republic, like the foundations of it, sort of like eliminate those things, like the family unit and like that sort of like art.
Okay. Anybody else? I think what Plato is doing here is a little meta. If I could use that word. He says, as poets love their poems and fathers love their children, so those who have made money take their money seriously. Who wrote this book? Plato. This is Plato's baby. Okay? This is his poem. This is his child. And so I think we're getting a clue here as to something that I had said last class, which is this work was written with a lot of care and intention. The examples are chosen consciously. The words are chosen consciously. This isn't somebody just writing down stream of consciousness, whatever happens to appear to their minds. Plato has thought deeply about what he wants to say and how he wants to say it. And so I take this passage as being kind of a meta-commentary on Plato saying, pay attention to the things that I'm doing in this book when you read it. Okay? When you read these scrolls, there's a lot going on here. Okay? And that would make sense because there's probably a lot of things he couldn't explicitly say during this time because maybe he would end up like Socrates. Right? Okay. So, go ahead, Cephalus.
That's true.
Indeed it is, but tell me something else. What do you think is the greatest good you have enjoyed as a result of being very wealthy?
What I have to say probably would not persuade the masses, but you are well aware, Socrates, that when someone thinks his end is near, he becomes frightened and concerned about things he did not fear before. It is then that the stories told about Hades, that a person who has been unjust here must pay the penalty there. Stories he's used to make fun of. Twist his soul this way and that for fear they are true. And whether because of the weakness of old age, or because he is now closer to what happens in Hades, and has a clearer view of it, or whatever it is, he is filled with foreboding and fear, and begins to calculate and consider whether he has been unjust to anyone. If he finds many injustices in his life, he often even wakes from sleep in terror, as children do, and lives in anticipation of evils to come. But someone who knows he has not been unjust has sweet good hope as his constant companion, a nurse to his old age, as Pindar says. For he puts it charmingly, Socrates, when he says that when someone lives a just and pious life, sweet hope is in his heart, nurse and companion to his age, hope, captain of the ever-twisting mind of mortal men. How amazingly well he puts that. It is in this connection, I would say, the possession of wealth is most valuable, not for every man, but for a good and orderly one. Not cheating someone even unintentionally, not lying to him, not owing a sacrifice to some god or money to a person, and as a result, departing for that other place in fear. The possession of wealth makes no small contribution to this. It has many other uses too, but putting one thing against the other, Socrates, I would say that for a man with any sense, that is how wealth is most useful.
Okay. So now that Cephalus is getting old, what does he started thinking about? What do all people start thinking about when they get old?
He's kind of thinking about like where he's going in the afterlife and how he's lived his life, reflecting on it.
Right. He's thinking about death. As you get old, you're going to think about the fact that, oh, shoot, I'm probably going to die soon. Right? And so he discusses how, look, when I was young, Cephalus says, I made fun of all these religious myths and these religious stories. I made light of what people say is going to happen to you after you die. I didn't think there was an afterlife. I didn't care about it. Right? I lived my life. I partied. I drank wine. I had my orgies and my feasts. I lied to people. Maybe I cheated some people. Maybe I did a little scheming in my business dealings. But now that I'm getting old, I'm starting to think about death, and I'm starting to think about divine retribution. Right? Cephalus is worried about what's going to happen to him when he dies because he has not lived a perfect life. He's cheated people. He's lied. He's stolen. Maybe he hasn't treated people the way that they ought to be treated. Right? And so the coming death that we all face inspires us to reflect on the goodness of our own lives and where we're going to be going after we die. We don't have any proof that the afterlife exists, but we still worry about it, don't we? Especially as we get older, or if we get a terminal illness. Right? And so, what is wealth good for, ultimately? What does Cephalus think wealth is good for? What is it allowing him to do in his old age?
Well, for starters, he doesn't have to steal anything in order to get by. He did what was afforded to him.
Right? Yep. He can forego maybe those criminal activities he engaged in when he was young. What else?
He doesn't owe anyone any money.
Right. Yeah. And since he's done bad things in the past, what does wealth allow him to do now? Do good things now. And make amends. Right? He can pay back the people that he's stolen from. He can give opportunities to people now that he stole opportunities from in the past. Wealth, Cephalus says, is useful to make amends, to pay back debts to those that he's taken from, and to perform the rituals and the rites that are going to get him in good with the gods. Because in order to perform these rituals, you need certain items, maybe animals, maybe little trinkets to offer on altars and things, right? Wealth allows him to make amends with people and to do the necessary rites and rituals to maybe pay for his sins in front of the gods. Socrates responds, "A fine sentiment, Cephalus. But speaking of that thing itself, justice, are we to say it is simply speaking the truth and paying whatever debts one has incurred? Or is it sometimes just to do these things, sometimes unjust?" So this is very interesting. Within Cephalus' own dialogue, Cephalus puts forth the idea that justice is paying what one is owed and speaking the truth. This is the conception of justice that Cephalus has. Giving to each what one is owed and speaking the truth. Socrates is going to question whether or not this conception of justice is right and sufficient. And so he says, "Or is it sometimes just to do these things, sometimes unjust?" I mean this sort of thing, for example. Everyone would surely agree that if a man borrows weapons from a sane friend, and if the same friend goes mad and asks for them back, the friend should not return them, and would not be just if he did. Nor should anyone be willing to tell the whole truth to someone in such a state. So Socrates tears down a little bit Cephalus' notion of justice. What do you think about Socrates' rebuttal? You think it's a good one? Is it just to give the gun back to your insane friend who lent it to you? What do you think?
No, because he could harm people, but also yes, because it's his gun.
So maybe you think justice does have something to do with giving what one is owed. Okay. Anybody else? Is it just to give the gun that your friend lent to you back to them if they have become insane?
Justice is also really heavily based on perspective.
Okay, say more.
Is this friend actually insane? What proof do we have to know that he's off his rocker, or do we just want his gun?
Let's say that he's really insane. He is psychotic now. He's had a psychotic break.
Like he's killed someone already?
Not yet.
How do we know that he's like having a psychotic break? Like he tells us, hey man, I'm gonna kill someone. And we're like, oh dude.
He's talking nonsense, talking about hearing voices in his head, doing irrational things, threatening people on the street, running at people. You give him back his gun? Is that just?
I think it's just to not do it because it's not hurting. If you don't give it back to him, it might hurt his pride, but it's not hurting him. The outcome, if you give him the gun, is significantly worse than the outcome of him not having it.
Okay, so even though he lent it to you, it would be just not to return it. Because he might hurt himself or another person?
It's not saying you'll never return it, but at that point in time, keep it and see what happens.
Okay.
Well, if you put it in what they said, I mean, that insane person shouldn't even be able to drive a car then. Because he could use the car to run people. So he'd take his car out.
Well, he didn't lend you his car, right?
Yeah, but like let's say.
It's a good question, yeah. Yeah. You might say, look, maybe we need to restrict this guy's freedom because he is so insane,
Yeah,
right?
like, can you not go in the kitchen anymore because there's knives there? Can you not use a pencil anymore? Can you use a pen?
Yeah, interesting questions. Socrates is bringing up this sword lending example because Cephalus specifically stated justice is giving what one is owed. and it would seem like giving back something that someone has lent them to you. They own that, they're owed that, right? So do you buy Socrates' rebuttal? Do you think it's a good one?
Well, I mean, nowadays even someone could have, if someone reports somebody, they could be 3 or 2 and sent to a psychiatric hospital anyway. So yes, in a sense, they could be restricted from all those things if they have to go to, if they're like if they're giving off certain symptoms, they could have to go to a psychiatric hospital.
Yeah. I think Socrates' rebuttal is fine. I think it makes sense, right? What he's trying to reveal to Cephalus, though, is that his concept of justice is insufficient. Okay? It doesn't cover all the bases that a concept should. Justice is a complex thing. And again, because Cephalus is supposed to be a symbol of the old ways and traditions, Plato is saying those old ways and traditions don't have a sufficient concept of justice. What he's going to be doing in this whole book is trying to work out what justice is. Because remember, he's concerned with changing Greek society. He's concerned with making Greek society better. And if Greek society has a mistaken concept of justice, how is it going to be a good place to live? How are people going to be happy? How are people going to be treated fairly? And he uses an example which is interesting. He talks about a friend lending another person a sword. This example is significant. Again, we see the theme pop up of force versus persuasion, power versus knowledge. Right? The sword example is meant to evoke power, violence, force. And Plato recognizes that, look, you don't put power, violence, and force in the hands of people who are unwise or insane. Right? Especially if they're insane. Okay, so what does Cephalus say?
That's true.
Then the following is not the definition of justice: to speak the truth and repay what one has borrowed. Polemarchus interrupted. It certainly is, Socrates, if indeed we are to trust Simonides at all.
Well then, I will hand over the discussion to you, since it is time for me to look after the sacrifices.
Am I, Polemarchus, not heir of all your possessions?
Ha ha ha.
Certainly, an atheist, certainly. And then you go off to do your sacrifice, right? Okay, so there are a number of things happening here. First of all, Polemarchus interrupts, and what does he do? I'll give you a hint. What logical fallacy does Polemarchus commit?
Isn't it like an ad hominem? Because it's like attacking something.
Not ad hominem.
Of red herring, because he's sort of like diverting attention to whoever Simonides is.
I wouldn't call it a red herring. Think of Simonides as a historical figure that is seen as wise in Greek culture and knowledgeable.
Maybe you don't like the appeal to tradition.
Maybe that. What were you going to say? I think it's appeal to authority, kind of. Or you could say appeal to tradition. But yeah, the first thing that Polemarchus says is he makes this logical fallacy. An appeal to authority or an appeal to tradition. Right? Maybe if, like Plato, you don't look upon democracy very highly, you might think, oh, this is typical of somebody with a democratic constitution. Right? Not being logical, just appealing to what others think. And then Cephalus says, okay, I have to leave. I'm going to hand the discussion over to my son. His son is Polemarchus. Because he has to go look after the sacrifices. This is important. Why? Cephalus is not going to show up in the dialogue again, in the whole book. Why does Cephalus have to leave for Plato? Why is he making him leave in the story?
Could like symbolize the old tradition.
Exactly. Yeah. The old traditions, they've said their piece. We can investigate them when we want to. But for the sake of the kind of story, the kind of philosophy that Plato's using here, he's saying the old traditions need to take a step back. Now it's time for the young blood to investigate this topic and rule. Okay? And have these discussions. This is why Cephalus has to lead. And perhaps we might even read into this that justice itself, what a just society does is it passes the torch from the old to the young. Right? You probably wouldn't say a just society is one in which everybody who makes the decisions are 70-year-olds that you think are out of touch with reality. Right? You're probably more likely to support younger politicians who think that they have a more accurate grasp on the way society is now. Right? So maybe Plato is in a sense saying that justice itself implies a passing of the torch from the old to the young when the time is right. Perhaps. So in any case, Cephalus passes the torch to his son, who's going to continue the discussion on his behalf. Socrates must leave for Plato. The old ways cannot remain forever. They have an insufficient conception of justice and how to rule. They are fine and good in some respects, but they're not perfect. So he goes off to make the sacrifice. Then tell us, heir to the discussion, just what Simonides said about justice that you think is correct. Would you like to be Polemarchus as well?
Sure.
The son?
He said it is just to give to each what is owed to him, and a fine saying it is in my view.
Well now, it is not easy to disagree with Simonides, since he is a wise and godlike man. And even though Cephalus has left, Plato is implying that the old ways and the traditions need to make way for the new understanding, the more complete understanding. He's still paying respect to the old ways here. Right? He's complimenting Simonides. It's not easy to disagree with him, since he is a wise and godlike man. But what exactly does he mean? Perhaps you know Polemarchus, but I do not understand. Clearly, he does not mean what we said a moment ago, namely giving back to someone whatever he has lent you, even if he is out of his mind when he asks for it. And yet, what he has lent to you is surely something that is owed to him, isn't it?
Yes.
But when he is out of his mind, it is under no circumstances to be given to him?
True.
Then it seems Simonides must have meant something else when he says that to return to what is owed is just.
Something else indeed. By Zeus, he meant friends owe something good to their friends, never something bad.
Okay. So Socrates, first of all, he's being charitable to Simonides. Right? He says, well, clearly, the view you think Simonides had is wrong, so he must not have believed that. That's utilizing the principle of charity. Right? Not presuming the worst of who you're speaking about, but presuming the best. Giving them the benefit of the doubt. And then Polemarchus says, what Simonides really meant is, friends owe something good to their friends, never something bad. I understand. You mean someone does not give a lender what he is owed by giving him gold, when the giving and taking would be harmful, and both he and the lender are friends. Isn't that what you say Simonides meant?
It certainly is.
Now what about this? Should one also give to one's enemies whatever is owed?
Yes, by all means. What is in fact owed to them, and what an enemy owes an enemy, in my view, is also precisely what is appropriate, something bad.
Okay, so we get Polemarchus' conception of justice now. Cephalus said justice is speaking the truth and giving to each one what they're owed. And Polemarchus is going to expand upon this, and he's going to say justice is doing good to your friends and harm to your enemies. That's what justice is. What do you think about that? Do you think he's right? Is justice doing good to your friends and doing harm to your enemies? Why not?
Because your friends could be wrong.
Interesting.
But it depends.
I see some people shaking their heads. What do you think justice means? This is a hard question, right? Yeah.
I think justice is making a decision, like a reasonable decision. Justice is personally.
Okay, so there's something, reason has to play a role?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe when you think of justice, some of you have in mind social justice or equity or something like that.
Justice could be doing what is right over what is wrong.
Interesting. So there's a moral element to it. Being just isn't just about politics, it's about morality. Okay.
I agree with the moral thing, and I also think that justice is giving people what they deserve. Like, even though they're your friends doesn't mean they deserve good things, and just because they're your enemies doesn't mean they deserve bad things.
Okay. Yeah, so you're even kind of expanding on Polemarchus' view a little bit. You're saying, look, sometimes enemies don't deserve harm, and sometimes your friends don't deserve good, depending on what they did. Okay. That all makes sense to me. Socrates then is going to say, it seems then Simonides was speaking in riddles, just like a poet, when he said what justice is. For what he meant, it seems, is that it is just to give to each what is appropriate to him, and this is what he called giving him what is owed. Let me just say one thing. Why do you think there's this interjection? Saying Simonides is speaking in riddles, just like a poet. Why would Plato say that? Why is he putting this in the mouth of Socrates?
He's saying that poets are wise.
Kind of the opposite.
Like poetry,
I think.
sort of like it tends to go towards the like emotions of the human, like not the rationality, but philosophy is like logic and reason.
Right.
So Socrates is a philosopher, he lives through philosophy, so I don't think he would really like abide by poetry or sort of thing like that.
Right. So I think there are two themes showing up with just this little interjection. One is the logic and reason should be privileged over emotion and feeling. Yep. And then the other is reality should be privileged over images and appearances. Because what do poets do? Poets are not recounting, oftentimes, a true story to you that actually happened. They're making up something to make you feel a certain way, right? They're throwing images at you, pictures at you, painting a picture for you. That's an image. An image is not the same as reality. Okay? And this tension between the image and reality is going to come up later in Book 6, when Plato gives us the allegory of the cave, in which he describes a story that I told you before, in which the prisoners are trapped in the cave, and their heads can only face one direction, and they're forced to watch the shadows on the walls, and they think the shadows on the walls are reality, when that's not reality. One prisoner eventually escapes, leaves the cave, sees the sun for the first time in the outside, in the water, and reflections, and the person realizes what is actually real. And the prisoners looking at the shadows on the walls are just looking at images. Okay, they're not actually understanding how the world actually works, even though they think that's what reality is. So I think we have two themes popping up here. Logic over emotion, and reality over image. And he's associating images, appearances, with poets.
But can't realities be false? I mean, they open up the allegory of the cave, I think, was a shot at democracy saying that, like, the majority's perception of reality is false, because that's all they can see.
Right.
So, because they're in the chamber, so doesn't that kind of like relate to us now? I mean, it's so polarized, politically speaking. Everyone's in an echo chamber, everyone thinks they're right, everyone thinks their reality is correct. So doesn't that kind of like who they think reality is correct?
Plato is going to say there is an objective way things are. A true way that things actually are in the world. And the majority of people are simply mistaken about it. Wouldn't you say there's a fact of the matter about what's true and right?
I think that I think there's an objective truth.
Right.
It comes down to
That's reality for Plato, objective truth.
But I think humans have more nuances than just like a blanket. Like I think there's objective truth. I think for the majority of the time there's not a straight objective because humans are so different.
Makes sense. I think Plato is going to take a more hardline approach and say, look, we can all come to the objective truth if we use our reasoning capacities.
Yeah.
But the majority of people are not doing that. They're living in their fantasies. They have incorrect interpretations of what's actually going on. So he's probably going to be a little more hardline than you, but I think that makes sense. Okay. So he says, Simonides is speaking in riddles. It seems that it is just to give to each what is appropriate to him, and this is what he called giving to him what he is owed.
What else did you think he meant?
Then what, in the name of Zeus, do you think he would answer if someone asked him, Simonides, what owed or appropriate things does the craft we call medicine give, and to which things?
Clearly, he would say give drugs, food, and drink to bodies.
And what owed or appropriate things does the craft we call cooking give, and to which things?
It gives pleasant flavors to food.
Good. Now what does the craft we would call justice give, and to whom or what does it give it?
If we are to follow the previous answer, Socrates, it gives benefits to friends and harm to enemies.
Does Simonides mean then that treating friends well and enemies badly is justice?
I believe so.
And who is most capable of treating sick friends well and enemies badly in matters of disease and health?
A doctor.
And who can do so best in a storm at sea?
A ship's captain.
What about the just person? In what actions and what work is he most capable of benefiting friends and harming enemies?
In wars and alliances, I imagine.
All right. Now, when people are not sick, Polemarchus, a doctor is useless to them.
True.
And so is a ship's captain to those who are not sailing.
Yes.
So to people who are not at war, a just man is useless?
No, I don't think that at all.
So justice is also useful in peacetime.
Yes, it is useful.
And so is farming, isn't it?
Yes.
For providing produce.
Yes.
And shoemaking as well, of course.
Yes.
For the acquisition of shoes, I suppose you would say.
Of course.
Tell me then, what is justice useful for, using, or acquiring in peacetime?
Contract, Socrates.
Okay, so this is an interesting response. Socrates is doing this Socratic thing, he's questioning away, trying to show the person ultimately that the concept that they have is insufficient. They haven't really thought it out. They haven't used their critical thinking to see through what they believe implies. And he asks, what is justice useful for in peacetime? And Polemarchus says, contracts. Polemarchus seems to imply here that what he thinks justice is some legalistic thing. He doesn't have a conception that justice and morality are connected. Okay? He thinks that politics and morality are kind of separate things, and justice is in the political realm. Okay? It doesn't really have to do with what's moral or what's right. It has to do with politics. And so, he's advancing what we would call a legalistic conception of justice. Justice is about laws and following laws, not about what's moral or immoral. This is why he answers contracts. He doesn't have in mind that justice is something like being good and kind, but something like following the laws of the city. This is what contracts are, right? They're legalistic agreements. And by contracts, you mean partnerships or what?
Partnerships, of course.
So, is it a just man who is a good and useful partner in a game of checkers, or an expert checkers player?
An expert checkers player.
And in laying bricks and stones, is a just person a better and more useful partner than a builder?
Not at all.
Well, in what kind of partnership then is a just person a better partner than a builder or a lyre player? And in the way a lyre player is better than a just person at hitting the right notes?
And money matters, I think.
Except, I presume, Polemarchus, in using money. You see, whenever one needs to buy or sell a horse jointly, I think a horse breeder is a more useful partner, isn't he?
Okay.
And when it is a boat builder, or a ship's captain?
It would seem so.
In what joint use of silver or gold, then, is a just person a more useful partner than anyone else?
When yours must be deposited for safekeeping, Socrates.
You mean whenever there is no need to use it, but only to keep it?
Of course.
So when money is not being used, that is when justice is useful for it.
It looks that way.
And when one needs to keep a pruning knife safe, justice is useful both in partnerships and for the individual. When you need to use it, however, it is the craft of vine pruning that is useful.
Apparently.
And would you also say that when one needs to keep a shield and a lyre safe and not use them, justice is a useful thing? But when you need to use them, it is the soldier's craft or the musician's that is useful?
I would have to.
And so in all other cases too, justice is useless when they are in use, but useful when they are not.
It looks that way.
Then, justice cannot be something excellent, can it, my friend? For it is only useful for useless things. So, there's some interesting things going on here, but it's not exactly clear what kind of argument Socrates is advancing. Right? First of all, he talks about this checkers player thing and this bricks and stones thing. And what I think he's trying to get at there is that justice is more than just being good or a useful partner in social matters. Justice is more than just being good or useful, being useful in social matters, okay? There's something more that justice is. And then when he talks about in using money and safeguarding money, I think he is implying that justice is more than usefulness of matters of transaction. So justice seems to be something that applies not just to money, not just to usefulness in social interactions. It's larger than that. It's more expansive than that. There's something more in our conception of justice. And then I just want to say one more thing. And this is when he talks about justice cannot be something excellent according to Polemarchus. What he has in mind here is arete. Arete is the Greek word for excellence or virtue. And whenever you see excellence or virtue, you need to think activity. Something doing something. Okay? And so what he's saying is that if justice is what Polemarchus says, then it can't be excellent. It can't be an active thing. But it seems like justice is. Justice is an excellent thing. Justice is a matter of activity, right? We dispense justice. We impose justice. So Polemarchus' conception is falling apart here. Okay, we'll stop there. And we will continue on Thursday, picking up from, what is it? 333, 10e. All right.